So good morning, everyone. My name is Chris, and I work here at the University of Leicester. And today I'm going to talk to you about my experiences using Blackboard to try to help my students to improve their writing skills. I'm talking about Blackboard. Please don't take me wrong. It's not because I'm really fond of it. I don't think anybody is. But it just happens that it is the virtual learning environment that we use here at the University of Leicester. Am I right to assume that most of you here in this room use a virtual learning environment in your institution? Yeah. So I don't know if you use Blackboard or if you use Moodle or if you use any other kind of virtual learning environment. I hope the things I'm going to tell you today about the way I use Blackboard will also be useful for you in whatever virtual learning environment you use. So in this presentation, I want to talk to you about the way I found to use Blackboard to improve the quantity of input I provide to my students, to collect their writing output, and also as a means of interaction and writing interaction that would help them to improve their understanding of the conventions of academic writing, and also to give them more opportunities for practice. So what I'm going to talk to you today, first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my teaching context so you understand what kind of students I'm talking about. Then, of course, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the modules I teach, so you see how actually writing fits into the program. I'm going to very briefly talk to you about the most frequent uses of a virtual learning environment, how most of us actually use them, and how try a little bit different is the way I've been doing that. And that's the main focus, is what I call the academic writing tutorial. That's something I developed to use on Blackboard. That's the main point, actually, of this presentation. I'm going to also let you know about the feedback and the assessed output, and how I deal with that through Blackboard. In terms of writing practice, I'm going to show you some of the blogs, some examples of how I use the blogs on Blackboard, and then we'll go to the final considerations. All of this in 25 minutes. So my teaching context, the course I'm specifically talking to you about, are Erasmus and the study abroad programs. I don't know if you have them in your institution, but you could also use this with other kinds of programs and studies, but this is specifically what I'm talking about. So my students are BA students in their home countries. They are mostly Europeans, most Spanish, French, a couple of Germans and Austrians. Some Far Eastern students, Koreans, South Koreans especially, some Chinese and some Japanese, but from Asia, mostly South Koreans. They are usually between levels B2 and C1 of the European framework. Usually, I mean, because we don't really test them. They don't need any requirements to come. So, but fairly speaking, they are between these two levels. Usually the Spanish, as a broad gross generalization, fall about between B2, and we have some Northern Europeans that's C1 and sometimes C2 level. So quite high level of language proficiency. And it's a 10-week credit-bearing module on literature and language. They do Shakespeare because they usually cannot get into the main course, Shakespeare course, in the English department, because they are deemed not to have the language proficiency level enough to get into the English department doing Shakespeare. But they also do another module in general literature, English literature and language. Oops. And I have one session of 2 hours a week. Actually, it's not 2 hours because we have a break and we start 5 past the hour and finish 5 before the hour. So it's not really 2 hours. But let's say in these 2 hours, I just have to do this with them. I have to focus on literary works in different genres. I have to focus on literary criticism. I have to give them some feedback on different ways of approaching the texts. I have to do some language development, vocabulary and grammar. I have to do some skill developments for skill reading, listening, speaking, writing, and I have to do academic English, mostly reading and writing, all the strategies to deal with them, and I have to do transferable skills and independent learning in less than 2 hours, once a week. So it was clear to me from the beginning, when I started teaching these modules 3 years ago, that it is just impossible. Right? It's just impossible. I can just touch very briefly on this kind of things. And for me, obviously, I needed more time, which I didn't have. So my obvious conclusion is that I had to do something for them to work outside the classroom. And the tool I had was my Blackboard. So I say, let's try to use Blackboard to take some of these things out of the classroom and do some of these things outside. So how do we usually use Blackboard? Tell me if I'm wrong. We usually, for distance learning, obviously, we have distance learning courses that are based on Blackboard. We have in our department, unashamed plugging. We have the TIP course that we teach trainee teachers to become EAP teachers. We have the distance learning. And this is important because this course provided a model that I actually used to develop my academic writing tutorial. So we use for distance learning, we use for blended learning, when you have students come, so they do something before on Blackboard, distance, they come, they do their courses, and then we have the follow-up on Blackboard. These are the most frequent uses. But in terms of face-to-face students, at least in our department, Blackboard is usually used for very simple things. We use them, Blackboard, as a file repository. So we upload them, tell me, Charlene, we upload forms that the students have to download. We upload some practice tests, pre-sessionals, practice tests. We upload some worksheets. Sometimes teachers want to upload some worksheets so students can have access. So it works simple file repository. Or sometimes teachers put web links on Blackboard. So you want our students to access some external website. We use Blackboard to convey these links. But first and foremost, we use for assignments, submission. Through Blackboard that students submit their assignments, and we check plagiarism using Turnitin. So these are the most frequent uses we made of Blackboard in our department. Is it the same for you? Yeah. So I thought, well, there must be something that we could do with it to help our face-to-face students and to help me to get those things out of the classroom and make my students work more outside. So I designed this academic writing tutorial because in previous terms, this has been going on for 1 year, 2 terms already. In previous terms, what happened is that the students went to the first assignment, and it was usually a disaster because it's not that they didn't have language, it's that they didn't know the conventions for writing academic essay in English. If you attended Mary Davis' presentation yesterday, is exactly what she was talking about. The students didn't have the concept of what plagiarism is. I mean, they have the theoretical concept, but they couldn't really understand how these things worked. So they didn't understand plagiarism, paraphrasing. So my experience told me that if we told them before a little bit about what are our expectations, my expectations, perhaps they would improve, it would make their lives easier in the assignment. So, so I designed the academic writing tutorial as an introduction to academic reading and writing. And it's based on the model that we developed for TIP. So I created as a sort of learning unit on Blackboard. So I created it's divided into 5 steps. And the 5 steps are academic honesty, obviously plagiarism. So input on plagiarism, academic style, register, organization and language, analysis and critical thinking, and citations and references. So the 5 steps when they have input on these 5 aspects. And there are practice exercises for each of these steps that are links to the EAP toolkit. Do you know the EAP toolkit? It was developed by the University of Southampton. So they are just clicking exercises, very guided practice exercise. So they have an input and you click A, B, C and you choose, and the students come very, very guided. But it gives them some practice in these aspects. And also some external links for references. For example, when he talked about citations and references, they do some exercises, but they also link to the Harvard guide online. So they can actually go back and refer and look at it again. And I assigned this tutorial as homework on the first week, because I see them just one every week, right? So the first lesson, I assigned a tutorial to them. So they have 5 steps. I expected them to spend 1 hour in each step. So if they did 1 hour a day, in 5 days they would cover the 5 steps in the tutorial. And at the end, I asked them to write a formative assignment of 500 words. So the idea is, okay, it's your first lesson, you have the tutorial as your homework, you do the 5 steps, 1 hour a day, and then over the weekend you write this formative assignment and then you submit to me. Oops. So, doing this, these were my expected outcomes. I expected my students that at the end of this week, and after doing the formative, doing the formative assignment, they would be able to do this. Have a better understanding of the concept of academic honesty and the rules and regulations of the university. They would be more familiar with style, these things about formality and choice of vocabulary. They would have a better concept of what's a primary and secondary source. They would be able to format their references, and they would be able to understand the concept of critical thinking and analysis, and produce a piece of acceptable writing. Of course, there were very expectations. So I provided the input, and I expected them to take the input on board, and you know what's coming, don't you? So at the end of the formative assignment, I still had about 50% of my students getting less than 40 in their marks. So I didn't have anybody at first level above 70, and I had 50% with 40 or less, with 9.1 students with a pass for credit, but basically fail, and another would really fail. So you probably be thinking about how did I decide this? Well, we have the marking criteria and the marking descriptors, right? So what I considered when marking is the marking descriptors are available. It's reading and analysis. By reading, I mean I would like to see evidence on my students' writing that they have read the texts in their reading list, especially the secondary reading, and that they had extended a little bit. They had found some extra sources, at least 1 or 2. And they could do some critical analysis, comparing and contrasting the reading they had. Of course, grammar and vocabulary, and organization of the paper, micro-organization and paragraph organization, and the use of referencing, proper use of citations and references. What I found out that, as you can imagine, because of the level of my students is quite high, the low scores you saw there were not because they had language problems. Most of them did not have serious language problems, but they didn't have the concept of incorporating sources in their writing, and their organization and referencing was really poor. Even though I said, oh, you have to use Harvard, here is the guide, you just go and do it, you could imagine, you had all kinds of referencing systems going around, sometimes 2 different referencing systems in the same paper, and it was pretty messy. So, obviously, it confirmed what we already know, that conceptual knowledge does not mean that because they can recite by heart what plagiarism is and what are the steps of paraphrasing are, it doesn't mean they can actually do it. And also show me that the students have different attitudes toward the tutorial. Even though I told them, it's very important, you have to do it, you're going to do this just 1 hour a day, and at the end you're going to produce something. Some of them simply ignored it. They didn't do it, okay? So because they thought they had already an understanding of this, they simply didn't do it. Others did really try to do it. I'm telling you this because I received feedback. Others did try to do it. They thought they had understood the concepts, but they could not apply them. And others, some others still, they did it, but when they received their feedback from me, they simply didn't bother to open the file and read it. Okay? So, my great expectations failed. So what was the feedback? The feedback I gave, I have the rubrics on Blackboard. I'm not sure you're familiar with the rubrics, but you can put your marking descriptors there, and you can tick the boxes, and you can show them the breakdown of the tutorial. And then I marked I uploaded their file, uploaded their paper, and I marked online using the word review tool. And then I uploaded them the file again. I uploaded their marked assignment again. So they received everything through my grades. They received the rubrics with the descriptors, with the breakdown of the descriptors, and their marked paper with the comments. And I used the correction code. But the correction code was not only grammar. I included things like cautious language, style, critical analysis, misunderstanding, misconception. And instead of correcting, say, go back to academic writing tutorial step 2. Go back to academic writing tutorial step 5. Go back to academic tutorial step 1. Okay? So what happened is that they had to do it again, of course, then for their assignments. They had 2 assignments, a critical review and an academic standard academic essay, 1,000, 1,500 words. So they went through the process twice. So they had input, output, they produced, they had feedback, and they were referred back to the academic writing tutorial. I didn't explain plagiarism, I didn't explain style, I didn't explain references. They had to go back and look at the tutorial again, and again, and again. So at the end, what happened? As you can see here, this is the same graph, but the formative assignment is red. I had 2 1s, I had a pick into 2, and then I had pass for credits and fail. A1, I already had a few number of firsts, and I have 2. I didn't have credit, but still had a fail. In A2, I have a considerable into 1, 2, 2. I didn't have any credits and any fails, which is more or less in line with the other modules that we have in the department. I think this graph shows it a little bit better. So this is formative assignment in red, first assignment in green, and second assignment in blue, which I think is considerable progress. And then I used blogs. Oh my God. I also use blogs with them because I don't think this improvement I show is just because they had to look at the input and just because of my feedback. I don't think so. I think it's a combination of different things. I had to provide them more opportunities for writing practice. But I wouldn't increase the number of assignments because I don't want to mark them. And I need them, and writing in class is, you know, it's extremely time consuming. I could not do writing in class. So I used, again, I went to Blackboard. So you're going to write your blogs. I had different kinds of blogs. They were assigned as homework. There are different kinds of tasks. I'm going to show an examples very quickly. They were collaborative activities. I gave them different aspects to blog about. So not everybody blogged about the same thing. They had space for comments. And this is very important. They would write the blog, but the next lesson, they would sit together and they would talk about the things they wrote. So they would discuss their blogs. I'm just going to show you very quickly simple examples of, this is a critical analytical blog from an Eastern European student. He's extremely the language proficiency, the language level is really good, but he had a 2-2 in the formative assignment because I couldn't see evidence of further reading and I couldn't see evidence of citations and references or anything. His language is absolutely fantastic. But this is what he wrote in the blog. So what I highlighted in green are actually the aspects that he failed in the formative assignment. So paraphrasing and use of quotations, proper inclusion of quotations in the text, and proper referencing at the end. They did creative writing. This is based on Dylan Thomas Wood. We analyzed in class the way Dylan Thomas has used the language of compound words. So they had to create compound words to describe a city. This is from a French student. So she created these compound words to describe her city. So you can see how she played around with language, trying to imitate Dylan Thomas' style. This is from a Korean student. Instead of writing prose, she decided to write a poem. And there were reader response blog where they actually reacted to a piece of writing. This is from a Spanish student. She was discussing the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. And so she connected with other pieces of other writings that she knew about. And at the end of the term, we had a learner reflective blog. This is from Shakespeare Group. They had to reflect on their learning process. And then she goes about, the first one is from one student talking about how she thinks she had progressed. The second one reflecting still on her difficulties in understanding Shakespeare. So my final consideration is that, yes, they are not the best thing in the world. They can be quite boring, but I think in face-to-face students, with face-to-face students, we still can use virtual learning environments for more than simple repositories and to collect their assignments. They easily provide access to a number of online tools. We don't have to go outside to go to different tools to blog or discussion lists or wikis. Outside, they are all contained in one login. They can facilitate access to input and feedback. They can provide opportunities for non-assessed writing in the case of the blogs, and then provide opportunities for creative and reflective writing. I had, by the way, in one term, 10 weeks, for each of these groups, I had three groups. One was 55 posts in the blog, the other 54, the other 50. So it's in a considerable amount of writing. And I had 16 students in each group. So they actually wrote quite a lot. And it provides interaction and a larger readership in the case of the blogs, because they are writing for somebody else, not just for me. And they engage with the language, especially in the creative writing. And that's it. I got some further readings, and thank you very much. Still have 1 minute for questions. 1 minute. No questions? Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. We actually have a sort of a similar situation in University of Macau. Very short time, a lot of students, a lot of work to do. And I'm just wondering, in your Blackboard, do you have the facility to make video recordings or audio recordings? Because we do in Moodle, and that helps a lot.
We can embed videos. Yeah, we can embed videos, and we can embed links. We can embed audio recordings.
Do
yes.
Students make any videos for their blogs?
No, I haven't with them, but it's possible if they can actually upload, or they can send to me and I can upload there. It is possible. Yeah.
You said in the initial stage with input, you assessed that they would spend an hour a day.
Yeah.
How did you work out?
In fact, well, more or less. I expect we did the ticking exercises and reading the sources. In fact, at the end of the term, we had the coordinator of these modules, the program, the Erasmus program, he did some sort of feedback from the students asking how many hours students had worked outside the classroom in terms of independent learning, not just for my modules, but for all the modules in the Erasmus program. And I was quite happy to see that I don't know, but my students were the ones that said average was 100 to 120 hours outside the classroom. So for me, my groups, probably there are a little bit of exaggeration there, but it's still, because they had to read so much for the assignments, and they had to do this kind of things, that I do believe they worked quite a lot outside. Aaron is telling me. So I have to finish. If you want to contact me, please do, and we can talk more about this. All right? Thank you very much.